Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're looking at a legal case that honestly feels more like a philosophical debate over truth itself than a straightforward criminal trial.
It's a really profound one. We're getting into the case of Chen Jingwan, who's a highly educated Chinese scholar sentenced to 20 months in prison for picking quarrels and provoking trouble.
And the charge is Sungsin Zishi.
That's the one.
So our mission for this deep dive is to take you straight to the source material. We have the court documents, the indictment, and most importantly, Chen's own incredibly detailed appeal letters.
And these documents, they lay out this amazing defense of free expression that's rooted in, of all things, advanced science and philosophy.
What's so wild is that this entire case is about his online activity. I mean, we're talking about reposting articles, forwarding comments, things like that, between 2019 and 2022.
Exactly. The whole conflict boils down to the court's definition of a false statement versus, the defendant's defense of intellectual skepticism.
Okay, so let's start with the man himself. Who is Chen Jingwan?
Right. So the records show he was born in 1976. He holds a PhD in physical science.
And what's his specialty?
It's nonlinear complex systems theory. And this background is so critical here.
Why is that?
Because he's not a political activist in the way you might think. His background is really dense. Technical science, defense tech, astrophysics, AI research. He calls himself an independent scholar.
So a scientist.
Yeah.
And the charges, they come from him using technology to get information from outside China's controlled network.
That's it. The documents say he used circumvention software, what you might call a VPN, to spread what the court called false statements that were intended to disrupt social order.
And what was the outcome of that?
He was detained in the fall of 2022 and then sentenced on April 3rd, 2023. He got 1 year and 8 months, 20 months in total.
And that charge against Sungsin Zishi just sounds so incredibly vague.
It is. It's known by critics, and Chen himself even calls it this in his letters, as a pocket crime. Kurizui.
A pocket crime. What does that mean?
The idea is that the law is so vague, so elastic, that authorities can just pull it out of their pocket and apply it to almost anything they don't like, especially online speech or dissent. It's a catch-all.
Okay, so let's break down the prosecution's case.
Yeah.
Because Chen attacks it so methodically. The court had to prove 3 specific things to get a conviction.
Correct. 3 pillars. First, the information had to be false statements. That's pillar 1.
Okay.
Second, Chen had to have known it was false. The legal term is mingzi, knowing clearly.
And the third?
The actions had to have caused severe chaos in public order.
Right, and here is where the case gets
Just
extraordinary. The court used his own education against him to prove that second point, the knowledge part.
They absolutely did. I mean, the official judgment says, and I'm quoting the idea here, that as a person with a very high education and knowledge level, he should distinguish right from wrong.
Wait, let me get this straight. They argued that because he has a PhD, he must have known the information was false.
It was basically used as circumstantial evidence of his criminal intent, that his high intellect meant he couldn't claim ignorance.
So his academic training, the very thing that teaches you to question and analyze, was twisted into evidence of a crime. That feels...
It's a complete paradox, right? It turns a huge intellectual asset into a legal liability. It makes the scholar potentially more guilty than an average person for the same act.
So how did Chen push back against that? What was his defense?
Well, he attacked the knowledge pillar head-on. He argued that in today's world, with so much complex information, he currently has no ability to determine the truth or falsehood of everything he comes across.
And he didn't just leave it there, did he? He went philosophical with it.
Oh, he really did. He brought up Plato's cave in his appeal.
Plato's cave.
Yeah. He used it as an analogy. He's saying, look, we're all prisoners in a way, and absolute objective truth is often hidden from us. For a scholar, skepticism isn't a crime, it's a duty.
And what about the third pillar, the severe chaos part?
He challenged that directly, too. He argued his reposts did not cause effective dissemination, much less severe network order chaos. He points out that the law usually requires a huge number of forwards or followers to meet that standard.
And he didn't have that.
He said his accounts had fewer than 100 followers combined, so he argued they failed to meet the legal threshold for causing any kind of public panic or disruption.
So he's attacking both the intent and the actual impact.
Exactly. He's saying the prosecution failed on both counts, they couldn't prove he knew it was false, and they couldn't prove it caused any real harm.
Which brings us to the actual content. What was this information that the court found so dangerous? What did the police actually use as evidence?
This is maybe the most insightful part of his letters. He breaks down the evidence they used, and the sheer breadth of it is just stunning. It wasn't just, misinformation, it was everything.
What do you mean by everything? Can you give us some categories?
Sure. So we can sort of group it into a few buckets. The first is what you might call art and subjective expression,
Art. Like what?
like cartoons. One was the Umbrella Girl cartoon related to the Hong Kong protests. There were also some political cartoons they found in his phone's cache. His argument was, look, art uses symbolism and exaggeration. It's not a factual statement, so how can it be a false statement legally?
That's a really important distinction.
Yeah.
Treating a cartoon like a news report.
Precisely. And in that same bucket were, like, emotional posts. He made a comment once about U.S. sanctions on Huawei, something like, looks like Huawei is going to be beaten back to its original form.
So an opinion.
An opinion. And he asked, how can my personal feeling be a criminal rumor?
Okay, so that's the first bucket. What was the second, more serious one?
This was the core of his defense as a scholar. It was academic material. This included articles on high-level political theory, like political spectrum classification, and that very controversial online essay, Objective Evaluation of Xi Jinping. It even included speeches by American officials like Mike Pompeo who were criticizing communism.
That just sounds like research material.
That's exactly what he argued. For a scholar of complex systems, you have to study conflicting viewpoints to understand how systems work, how they become stable or unstable. He even brought up classic academic debates, Karl Popper versus Marx, Hayek versus Keynes.
He's saying this is just standard scholarship.
He's saying it's the foundation of all scholarship, not a crime.
Okay, and the last bucket of evidence.
This was more what you'd call historical and factual claims. Things like the revision history of Mao Zedong's selected works, or photos of what were supposedly retiree pay stubs.
And his argument there.
He said, look, even if this stuff turned out to be false, I was a victim of the rumor, not the source. When I forwarded it, I was just passing along something I saw. The police should be clarifying the facts, not arresting the person who shared it.
But the court didn't see it that way.
No, they just lumped it all together and said the content was insulting and attacking the national leadership core and China's current political system.
To which Chen argued that criticizing a leader is a legal right. A supervisory right, he called it.
Right, so the whole case really becomes about this tension. Does the right to academic inquiry and criticism outweigh the state's demand for social order and an official version of the truth?
This is where his PhD in nonlinear complex systems theory really comes into play. He applies it directly to that severe chaos charge, which is just fascinating.
It's an incredible move. I mean, you have a scientist literally arguing the physics of network stability in a criminal court. He brings up concepts like self-organized criticality or SOC and avalanche dynamics.
Okay, hold on. You got to break that down for us. What on earth is avalanche dynamics in the context of a social media repost?
So it's an analogy. Think of a giant pile of sand that's, perfectly balanced on the edge of collapse. If you drop one more grain of sand on it, it might do nothing. But if the pile's in a critical state, that single grain can trigger a massive avalanche.
Where I get it.
So Chen argued that the network or society was not in that critical state. He said his little posts, with so few followers, were like a tiny grain of sand that was completely unable to trigger the avalanche dynamics mechanism.
So he's making a scientific case. My actions did not have the scientific capacity to cause the chaos the law requires.
Yeah.
That's a brilliant defense.
It is. He's using hard science to argue that his actions just didn't have the force required to cause the alleged harm.
And he didn't stop at physics. He brought in philosophy of knowledge, mentioning people like Hume and Gödel. That's taking it to another level entirely.
It really is. He's attacking the very idea of absolute certainty. He calls himself a skeptic who doesn't believe in definite knowledge.
And how does Gödel's incompleteness theorem fit into a legal defense?
Well, to put it simply, Gödel proved that in any complex logical system, there are true statements that can't actually be proven within that system.
So the implication is, if absolute proof is logically impossible in some cases, how can the court demand that he knew something was false with absolute certainty?
You've got it. He's saying that the court's demand for Mingji, that clear knowledge of falsehood, is logically impossible for a truly rigorous thinker. He's basically saying, my skepticism is intellectually required.
He even claims that to criminalize the study of opposing ideas is to undermine the entire edifice of human civilization. He's framing his reading list as a defense of global intellectual freedom.
He absolutely is. Which then begs the question, if his arguments were so strong, why were they rejected? And that brings us to the procedural issues he claimed happened.
His complaint letter goes into some very serious allegations about the process.
It does. He called it a zero evidence launch. He said the police arrested him first, then seized all his devices and started digging for evidence to build a case after the fact.
And he also alleged coercion.
Yes, he said his devices were examined through coerce, or coercion, and that the whole trial was held behind closed doors, not in an open court.
And that lack of an open hearing also applied to his appeal.
It did. He filed his appeal, he made all these same arguments again, and the Intermediate People's Court just didn't hold a hearing. They reviewed the documents
And rejected it.
swiftly. On May 12, 2023, they upheld the original verdict. They simply said the in-case evidence has formed a chain, basically rubber stamping the lower court's findings without hearing his complex defense argued out loud.
And Chen's final statement on this is, well, it's incredibly defiant.
It is. In his final documents, he makes it clear he never admitted any guilt. He vowed lifelong accountability against the judicial system.
It's a promise to hold him accountable for the rest of his life.
Yes, and he ends with this belief that cause and effect circulate and retribution will not fail. It's his final intellectual verdict on their process.
So after going through all this, what does this deep dive into Chen Jingwan's case really mean for you, for the listener?
I think it highlights this really critical tension. You're watching a legal system that's supposed to prevent public chaos being used against what is, by his argument, legitimate academic work. It's artistic interpretation, it's intellectual curiosity.
They didn't just criminalize facts they disagreed with, they criminalized the entire process of thinking and questioning.
Exactly. The entire case came down to how the court defines false information and severe chaos. And in this case, those definitions were wide enough to include a cartoon and a philosophical argument.
And that really leads us to the final provocative thought here, something Chen himself brought up.
It is. If a high education, if your intellectual capacity is used as proof that you should know better and therefore have criminal intent, what does that mean for the future of independent scholarship? For critical thinking, when a court can just dismiss complex arguments about Plato or Gödel as simple false statements, are we moving toward a world where, as Chen warned so Thoger, the more knowledge you have, the more reactionary and therefore suspicious you become?
It's asking whether the simple act of skepticism can itself become a crime.